I've been working on this for the last 3.5 years, but in reality, this is more than 40 years in the making. Welcome to my studio. I'm Steve. Welcome to my studio. Man, I've wanted to say those words for a long time, and I can't wait to show you around. But first, let me give you a little background. My love of recording and studios in general goes all the way back to when I first started playing guitar. So let's hop in the DeLorean and shoot back to, well, I don't remember what year it was, but a very young Stevie and his best buddy Omar had come across a couple of guitars. If memory serves me correctly, I had a little toy, cheap-ass acoustic guitar. Omar had an electric bass that a buddy of his had left at his house. So we thought it would be a good idea to go walking around the neighborhood carrying these guitars and banging on them and thinking we were total badasses. Well, we were walking down this one particular street, and this guy comes out of his house and says, "Hey, come in here. Let me show you how to play those things." The guy's name was Pete Sicchetti, and with that one sentence, he initiated a life's journey that's lasted well over 40 years and has pretty much defined my path in life. There's a lot more to this story, and I hope to tell it one day. But for the purposes of this video, the important part is that shortly after this happened, Pete converted his basement into a recording studio, complete with a control room with some kind of a mixing console with these real big knobs, and a live room, cork boards for soundproofing, and carpet on the walls to deaden it. Man, I can still remember the smell that all that cork board produced. As I was learning how to play the guitar, Pete would sometimes let me mess around with recording and taught me about overdubbing. I remember this one time, these two hotshots, Kenny Warren and Dennis Dillon, came by and wanted to record Flying High Again by Ozzy. Well, Pete recruited me to play the bass on it after showing me the parts, of course. Kenny was the local guitar hero because he could play Randy Rhoads licks, and that was something I couldn't even fathom at the time. Anyhow, this fascination with studios and recording continued to grow over the years, from setting up multiple boom boxes to record and overdub guitar parts on, to borrowing 4-track machines from friends, to getting my very first Tascam 8-track machine. Man, I wore that thing out, literally. This interest continued to grow such that in 2020, when I was finally blessed to be able to buy a house, one of my top priorities was finding a place where I could focus on building a studio, and that's what I've been doing ever since. So this isn't a typical studio with vocal booths and drum room and all that. As the name of this channel suggests, I'm a total guitar nerd, and this studio is all about electric guitar. I've got my control room, which is where I am now, and I've got my live room, which is where all of my amps and speaker cabinets live. There's a lot to talk about, so I'm going to split this into 2 videos. This one where I walk through my control room, the gear, how I've got everything set up. And then in the next one, we'll go into the live room, which is basically my wall of amps. Guitar world. Along the way, I'm going to touch on various elements of my video setup, because from the beginning, making videos has been a big part of the plan, and a lot of time, education, effort, and money has gone into making that as convenient and feasible as possible. Anyhow, I'm not going to waste any more time jabbering. Here's my studio. One of the first pieces of the puzzle I assembled is my studio desk. In the months leading up to and through the purchase of this house, I researched about every option out there, including the option of building it myself. That is, until I had to accept the fact that I suck at building things. I had a pretty good idea of what I wanted, and I found several companies whose offerings matched that, but they were just too expensive for me. And then I came across Busho Audio. As I explored their website and the various desks they offered, I was blown away at both the designs and their pricing. I settled on the Studio XL. The company's located in Budapest, Hungary, so I was initially concerned about shipping costs, but once everything was added on the invoice, shipping wasn't that expensive, and actually, the total cost came in several $100s below my budget. Since I ordered the desk, I've had several interactions with a dude named Ivan, who I believe is the owner of the company. When I first ordered the desk, I did not want the keyboard tray that comes as part of it, and Ivan was kind enough to shave a nice chunk off the price for me. Now, a year later, I changed my mind and decided I did want the keyboard tray, and Ivan was good enough to send me the components for the tray so I could add it to the desk for exactly what he had originally shaved off the price. Now, me and keyboards ain't a good thing, so the keyboard tray is not there anymore, but I have repurposed it into something else that you'll see in just a few minutes. I can't say enough good things about this desk. The craftsmanship is top-notch. It's constructed of, I believe, 13-ply birch, although the website now says they use furniture panels, which are made of recycling sawmill byproducts. This engineered wood is an excellent way to recycle wood chips, shavings, and sawdust collected from sawmills and doesn't contribute to more deforestation because it uses only wood waste material. Now, while it's possible my desk was created the same way, I'm looking at it and it looks like plywood to me. Either way, I'm proud to make this desk the centerpiece of my studio. Computer-wise, I'm using a Mac Studio with an M1 Max and 32 gigabytes of RAM. Now, it's only got a 512 gig solid-state drive, but I've got tons of external SSDs connected through USB 3 and Thunderbolt, so that's fine. My DAW of choice is Logic Pro, and I use SonarWorks Sound ID, as well as plugins from Universal Audio, Solid State Logic, Sonable, FabFilter, and other great stuff. Now, in over a year and a half of using this computer, it's performed phenomenally. I don't think I've ever even heard the fan kick on. For a screen, I'm using a Samsung 55-inch 4K TV. My eyes aren't the greatest, and it's really good to have all that screen real estate. I can run at 4K and still see everything on the screen. Now, a few weeks ago, I decided to raise the angle of my control surfaces, and that worked out great for me, but it also obscured about a third of my screen. I was trying to think of ways to raise the screen, and I remembered the keyboard tray that's no longer being used. So I pulled it out, did some measuring, found that it was too wide to fit in my available space. So I took it apart, repurposed the sides as leg supports, cut the top board down so it would fit, and voila! Now, the edges were still raw wood, so I ordered some edging from Amazon, applied it, and there you go. A TV stand that perfectly matches my desk. My speakers are from Head Audio of Germany. They're the Type 30 Mark I model. They feature two 7-inch woofers, a dedicated 4-inch mid-range driver, and a folded ribbon tweeter. If memory serves me correctly, each speaker in the box has its own 300-watt power amplifier. Head, which stands for Heinz Electrodynamic Design, was started by physicist Heinz Klaus, who was one of the founders of Atom Audio, and his son, musicologist Dr. Frederick Napone. I hope I said that right. In 2015. These are the most amazing studio monitors I've ever heard, bar none. They're clean, they're punchy, and they're transparent. And they're loud. Real loud. The Type 30s are seated on monitor isolation stands from ISO Acoustics. This helps to decouple the speakers from the desk material and ensures a more flat response. Behind the desk, I have two JBL LSR 310 subwoofers. Now, I gotta be honest, when I used to use the LSR monitor setup, I was super unimpressed with the LSR 310. When I hooked it up here with my Head Audio monitors, I couldn't even hear it. I was still unimpressed. But right about that time, they went on sale somewhere, I don't even remember where, but it was a ridiculously low price, so I figured what the heck, and ordered another one. I hooked them up through a Y cable to my monitor controller, and boom, just super big thumping sub frequencies. Right now, I've got about the bare minimum for acoustic treatment. The corners are treated floor to ceiling with bass traps. I have panels covering the large window behind my desk. I have treatment at the first reflection points. Above my head, I've got an 8-foot by 4-foot cloud that consists of 4 2-foot by 4-foot acoustic panels. And on my rear wall, I've got a monster bass trap, which is 7.3 inches thick. Now, the room is 18 feet, 10 inches long. The power here is fairly clean, which is good because a 60 cycle sound wave develops at 19 feet. So I imagine the 60 cycle hum in this room would really suck. The panels all came from GIK Acoustics, and I hope to add more in the very near future. In this rack, I've got my power conditioner, interfaces, some preamps, and my patch bay. The patch bay is from Redco, who I believe is out of New England somewhere. And this particular one has 96 patch points using TT connectors, and it's capable of just your standard normal, non-normal, and half normal operation. It uses DB25 connectors on the back. I'm using 2 Universal Audio X8P audio interfaces. This is a fairly recent upgrade to my system. Since 2016, I had been using an Apogee Ensemble Thunderbolt interface, and it did a great job. Really great sounding interface. Earlier this year, I added an Audient Evo SP8 mic preamp units so I could increase my track count up to 16. This setup sounded really good, but I've become a huge fan of UAD plugins, and I wanted to take advantage of the UAD platform of recording through some of these instead of adding the processing after the fact. The Apollo interfaces include a feature called Unison Technology, and the way it works is something like this. Say I add a Neve 1073 plugin into the Unison slot. The hardware is reconfigured to better resemble and sound like what the plugin is modeling. I wanted this ability on all of my incoming mic tracks for my guitar rig. As you'll see in the next video, I like to keep all of my 412 cabinets permanently mic'd. So when I'm recording, I can just select an amp, select a cabinet, and I'm recording without having to fiddle with mic placement. Solving this required more than the 8 preamps included in the Apollo unit, so I picked up a second one. You'll get more of a clear picture of this in the next video, and trust me, you're not going to want to miss this. I decided to keep the Evo SP8 for things that I don't necessarily want the Unison preamps or other UA processing on. For example, I always record a direct guitar signal for reamping later. That signal needs to be as clean as possible and really doesn't need to be going through any other processing. Same with my Kemper. And if I do want the Kemper to go through the UA processing, it's just a matter of a couple patch cables in the patch bay. The Evo is connected via ADAT to the Apollos, giving me 24 physical inputs and outputs. Before going with the Apollo interfaces, these racks were filled with outboard gear, mostly compressors, but I also had a couple Pultec clones and a dual Neve 1073 clone. I had grand designs of hopefully buying several more Neve style preamps. When I got the first Apollo a couple of months ago, one of the first things I did was to slap a Neve 1073 plug-in on the Unison slot of each microphone on the 412 cabinet that I was playing through. When I turned up the drive on that plug-in, I was blown away by the sound. Now, I'm not going to sit here and say it sounds as good as the Neve hardware. To my ears, it sounded better than the clone that I had been using. And I can't afford all those Neve preamps, so this is an easy compromise for me to make. It sounds great. I do a fair amount of my mixing utilizing the Slate VSX headphone system. Now, if you're not familiar with VSX, that's too deep of a rabbit hole to go into here. But the biggest endorsement that I can give VSX is there have been several times I've been listening through headphones and I've reached to turn down my monitors because it sounded like I was listening to expensive studio monitors in a room. There's a lot of hype around VSX, and believe it, I love it. Speaking of my monitor controller, I love this Nero from Audient. Now, before I got this a couple years ago, I was dubious. I didn't really understand the need or want for a monitor controller. I mean, unless you have 3 sets of monitors, okay, that makes sense. But once I installed this, all my doubts were gone. Having control of so many options in this little box is invaluable. Now, there may be better sounding units out there at higher prices, but I'm a 54-year-old rock and roll guitar player. I play over 220 gigs a year. I'm not going to hear the difference, and I'm skeptical of a lot of people who say they can. I mean, you know, unless you're Eric Johnson. These are my control surfaces. Now, similar to the monitor controller, I never really understood the need or the want for control surfaces. I mean, if you've been mixing on consoles for 20 years, then yeah, I get it. But I'd always mixed in the box using a mouse to move a fader on a screen, and I thought that was fine. However, when SSL released their UC1 plugin controller, and it came with the Channel Strip 2 plugin and their bus compressor plugin, I wanted these 2 plugins. They were $300 a piece, so I figured for a couple $100 more, I could get this controller. It's built like a tank, and worst case scenario, I don't like it and I sell it. Once I got it and hooked it up, I loved it immediately. So I started looking into getting fader controllers. I was looking at SSL's offering, the UF1, but I noticed it didn't have dedicated transport control, which was something I wanted, and it was only 8 faders. Then I saw the Behringer X-Touch units. I saw for the price of the UF1, I could get the X-Touch and the X-Touch extender, and I'd have 16 channels laid out right in front of me. Also, kind of a happy accident, look up the name of this thing, involves a piece of software called UA MIDI Control. Now, Console is an app that works with Universal Audio Apollo devices. Well, what I learned was using a program called UA MIDI Control, I can also control Console with my X-Touch units. When I'm trying to dial in mic combinations and blend the mics and other things in Console, doing it on a control surface makes a lot more sense and works really, really well. Over here to my left, you'll see my Stream Deck XL. Now, I initially got this a few weeks ago because of an idea I had about remote switching for some of my guitar rig in the other room. Once I got it and installed it, I learned how convenient it is to use for things like launching apps, and especially for controlling streaming software, which is what it was originally designed to do. I'm having a lot of fun with that one right now. Right here, hovering above my X-Touch extender, you'll see the mount that holds the camera that I use when I'm shooting video from this angle. It's attached to a semi-long arm that kind of worms and snakes its way from a pole it's attached to at the back of the desk. On the camera mount, this is a Canon R8. I do most of my shooting from this angle, so I wanted to go with a full frame camera. I'm using a 24mm lens with a fairly wide aperture setting of f1.8, so I could keep this nice depth of field behind me. I also use a Canon M50, and I'm using a Canon M6 Mark II right now with a Sigma 16mm lens. I have the aperture set wide to f1.4 to get as much light in as possible. The M6 is on a MESA Aircross 2 gimbal to ensure any movement is as smooth as possible. The mic is a Slate Digital M2 condenser microphone. To be honest, I kind of bought these on a whim last year as they were on sale. But for my guitar recording, I've got most of the mics that I want, so these weren't being used. I've got this mounted on an arm above my head. It's a swivel arm, so I can swing it around and use it for both angles. I also have another one mounted on an arm in the live room for when I shoot in there. Both mics are connected via XLR to my Zoom H4n handy audio recorder. Connecting them this way allows me to do my audio independent of the cameras. The H4n has the added bonus of being recognized by either a PC or a Mac as a 2x2 USB audio interface. This is really helpful when doing things like live streaming. If I'm using OBS Studio, I can route the microphone audio independently of whatever's going out over the stream. And this helps when the mic is right in the path of a loud guitar signal or something like that. It can be routed completely differently. To light these videos, I use a few different lighting solutions. When shooting facing the desk, I have a SmallRig RC220D with a fairly large softbox. I think it's 32 or 33 inches as my key light, and a smaller Neewer LED flapjack light for my fill. The key and the fill are each mounted to a triangle wall mount arm from SmallRig. I think these come out as far as 58 inches. They come in a few different sizes, and brands for that matter. These are just about perfect to get these lights where I want them without having to deal with light stands or poles and arms sticking out of my desk. If I spin around and shoot from the other angle with the desk in the background, I have two Neewer LED panel lights, and they're also mounted to boom arms, except for these are mounted to the ceiling. Because I'm using such a large screen for my computer monitor, those lights do tend to glare off the screen, so I've kind of had to compromise a bit with the placement of those lights so that they don't show up as much on the screen. They're moved pretty far back, but they're plenty bright enough to still light me up. I also use various practical lights here and there to kind of dress things up a little bit. I have LED light strips running up the inside corners of my corner bass traps behind the desk. There are a couple lamps at the rear of the room that give off a nice warm glow, and I have a few RGB LED light bars that are magnetic that I have scattered here and there to kind of add some color. Now over here to my right, you'll see my Kemper profiler head. I use this when I'm learning songs for my band Southside Saints, as well as general low volume noodling. Since I learned how to make my own profiles of my own amps and how to tweak them, I've come to regard the Kemper as a great alternative to loud tube amps, and I'll be honest, I've used one live for nearly 5 years now. Every gig I've played since April of 2016, I've used a Kemper. Occasionally, if I have to bang out a quick track for someone, I'll just use the Kemper, and I've gotten killer results doing that. I do plan to profile my amps that are in the other room. I just haven't gotten around to it yet, but when I do, I'm going to be adding some killer sounds to my live rig. Below the Kemper is a 1970 Fender Bandmaster 212 speaker cabinet. When I bought it, it had an original Fender speaker and a Radio Shack replacement speaker. I replaced those with a pair of Celestia G1265s from 1979. This cabinet is an 8-ohm cabinet, and that doesn't really fit into my workflow out there because I run everything at 16 ohms, but I love classic gear, and it's nice to have that in here with me. Over here on this wall, I have various guitars. Some are in states of disrepair, some are simply up here for utility, but each one has its own story. Some more interesting than others. Hopefully one day, though, I'll get around to telling these stories. For now, I'll just highlight this one. This is a Carvin V220 from 1985, my first real guitar. This is the guitar I really learned how to play on. I mean, I learned a few basics on an old Memphis Les Paul copy that had horrible string action. That thing was a mess. But it was on this guitar that I really hunkered down and hit the woodshed for 14, sometimes 17 hours a day and really figured this guitar thing out. Many of my old buds will definitely recognize this one. And even when I'd moved on to Charvels and Ibanez's, this guitar was always with me on the road. In my old touring band Havoc, this guitar was my drop D guitar. It's seen some changes over the past couple decades. At one point, I wasn't using whammy bars anymore and hadn't for like 14 years, so I replaced the stock Kahler tremolo with a Kahler fixed bridge. As you can see, it's very similar looking to the old Kahler tremolo, just no tremolo. I also dropped a Seymour Duncan JB into the bridge position because I love the JB and it's my go-to for bridge pickups in most of my guitars. I have a lot of history with this guitar, and God willing, it'll be with me as long as I live. If we walk over to the other side of the room, these shelves are where my guitar amp heads used to live. So now I'm repurposing the shelves for other things. For example, this one shelf is now my battery charging station. These are the RGB LCD bars I mentioned earlier. Charged and waiting for a new video. This all used to be on that little table back there, and to be honest, it looked pretty bad. Down here I've got some of my camera gear. Down there are some of my guitar pedals. Most of these have seen extensive live use and have gotten pretty gnarly. None of them are vintage insofar as collectability, with the exception of this Marshall Governor. I bought this on eBay quite a few years ago, early 2000s I believe. These boxes just hold some bulk speaker, guitar, and XLR cable for when I need to make some cables. Making them here saves me a ton of money over buying pre-made cables, but that's a story for another day as well. There are also a few things I use when cable making or other wiring maintenance stuff. And back here is my workbench where I change strings, do my guitar maintenance and repair, make cables, minor amp repair, whatever needs to be done. I keep spare or extra cables in these drawers for when I inevitably need them. The top drawer is instrument cable or line level cables. The second drawer is speaker cables. The third is computer stuff, USB cables and such. And the bottom one is power. The mounting position of this light makes it easy to adjust it for some overhead lighting on the bench for guitar techie kind of videos. One day I'd kind of like to have a camera mounted over the desk for these shots as well, but that's down the road a piece. And of course my trash can, you gotta have one of those. Well, that's it for part one of my studio tour. I hope you've enjoyed this video and maybe even found it a little informative. And I hope you'll join me in part two as I explain how I connect, play, and even switch between 8 amplifier heads, 4 speaker cabinets, and a few guitar pedals, all from the comfort of my studio chair. Until then, thanks for watching. I'll see you next time. I'm always looking for ideas for new videos, so if you have anything you'd like me to talk about, shoot me a message or let me know in the comments below. And if you haven't already, please hit that like button. It really does help to let YouTube know to spread my videos. Thanks.